Prominent Republicans in Georgia are railing against Donald Trump's continued election lies and promises to reveal information detailing fraud in the 2020 vote. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp replied to a Trump social media post yesterday, writing in part this: "For nearly 3 years now, anyone with evidence of fraud has failed to come forward under oath and prove anything in a court of law. Our elections in Georgia are secure, accessible, and fair, and will continue to be as long as I am governor." Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger also put out a statement writing, "The most basic principles of a strong democracy are accountability and respect for the Constitution and rule of law. You either have it or you don't." I appreciate these principles, but the bottom line is Donald Trump and right-wing media and anybody on the Republican side in leadership, many of them are still backing his lies or refusing to straighten them out.
Well, some of them are. Like I said, I talked about New York Post op-ed this morning, Dan McLaughlin, who tried to write it in a way that New York Post readers would appreciate the most. There's a lot of anti-Trumpism in there. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is he's done this to himself. Don't become suckers and follow the Democrats who are trying to prop up Trump candidates. You did it in 2022 and you lost every single race by election deniers. So they're starting to get the message out there. And, we always ask, well, where are the Republicans that will stand up? Tim Scott embarrassed himself earlier today, despite the fact I think he's a very talented candidate and could be a real contender, but still is going to war against the rule of law in America, which is really sad and depressing, especially since he's willing to trash the rule of law and trash the Justice Department and trash the FBI, all for a failed reality TV host who stole nuclear secrets and tried to steal an election. And Tim knows because Tim was there. But that said, yesterday, though, we also had something quite extraordinary, Chris Matthews. We had the governor, the Georgia governor Republican governor, who came out really quickly and really dramatically in a way he didn't have to do. And may I add, he did it in a way that most politicians wouldn't have done it, considering the timing. And I just want to show you the numbers of this guy and what Republicans think of him in his own state. Brian Kemp had a senator running against him, David Perdue. David Perdue was the Republican candidate who was Trump's crony. Brian Kemp, saying the same things then in that campaign that he's saying now, got 73% of the Republican vote in the Republican primary in 2022, standing up to Donald Trump's election lies. And so as we look, Chris, at a jury, it may not just be Democrats, as Greg Bluestein with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution suggested yesterday, that have a problem with Donald Trump trying to steal their election. A lot of Republicans do in the state of Georgia as well.
Governor Kemp is really providing great evidence for this trial because he's making it clear there is no question about the results in Georgia. And in fact, this is not the deep state. Atlanta is not the deep state. It's not part of Washington, D.C. And Raffensperger's, I think that quote you just showed a moment ago made it very clear. There was only one defendant in the case in Fulton County of those 19 co-defendants. And he's the only one that took the presidential oath to preserve, protect, and defend the United States Constitution. That's Donald Trump. Only one person took that oath. And the other thing is, Raffensperger's wonderfully put it, you either respect the Constitution or you don't respect the Constitution. Clearly, Trump doesn't. And now you have the governor and you have the Secretary of State making it very clear that Georgia voted for Joe Biden. Yes, they did, just like Arizona and just like Wisconsin, the states decided the election. It's going to be very clear for that jury that sits in Washington who won the election. The only one disagreeing will be Donald Trump.
Yeah, Donald Trump. And, you know, David French, Georgia Republicans have seen the chaos that Donald Trump's lies have sown. It has destroyed one Senate candidate after another. But for Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell would have been the majority leader after the 2020 elections. But for Donald Trump in Georgia, Mitch McConnell would have been most likely the same in 2022. Nobody has done more damage to the Georgia Republican Party than Donald Trump. He is, as Jonathan Lemire has reported, the White House knows Joe Biden would never win in the state of Georgia in 2024, but for one person, and that one person is the person being tried in the state of Georgia, probably in the next 6 to 9 months. You're not hearing, David?
Oh, I'm very sorry. You blanked out for a second. Yeah, look, Georgia has suffered the consequences of Trump's conduct more than Georgia Republican Party, more than anybody else. I mean, there's no question. But here's what's important. Even before Georgia Republicans started to suffer those consequences with those lost Senate races, already Brad Raffensperger and Brian Kemp, unlike so many other Republicans, had some steroids in their Wheaties. They were standing up to Donald Trump when so many other Republicans hadn't. They stood up early. They did not yield in any way, shape, or form. Brad Raffensperger, in particular, was outspoken. And Joe, you popped those numbers up, and the numbers showed that both of them won their races, and they won against Trump-appointed primary challengers before they won their general elections in a rout. So these are people who stood up to Donald Trump, and their political careers continued. And to this day, Brian Kemp is a popular Georgia Republican governor. And so this idea that you cannot possibly stand up to Donald Trump and have your political career survive has been disproven by these individuals. And in fact, the reality is, if you capitulate to Donald Trump and you fall under the big lie again, then your political career is going to suffer, as the 2022 midterm elections demonstrated.
Yeah, you know, David, I tried time and again to explain to Republicans in 2016 that Donald Trump was a bully and that if they showed weakness, he would run them over. And if they stood up to him and they were tough, he actually would probably back off and try to strike a deal with them where they could work together. I had the talk with Paul Ryan saying, you got to stand up to the guy. And Paul was well, I just want to pass my tax bill. And, you know, if I just stay out of the way. And no, that never, I was like, you cannot stay out of his way. And so I've always viewed it a tragedy. And I'll just say this. I went after Chris Matthews knows. I would go on Chris Matthews' show.
Yes.
And if a Democrat did something, I would go after a Democrat hard. If a Republican did something, I would go after the Republicans hard. When Newt Gingrich, I didn't think, was working hard enough to balance the budget, and working hard enough to be a small government conservative, we ran him out of town. And you know what happened? In a very, very safe Republican district, I became more popular. This has always been the tragedy, I thought, that nobody did what Kemp and Raffensperger did until 2020. That you could go after Donald Trump. You could be strong. You could do it in your district, and your voters would go along with you because they were your voters first. But no other Republicans ever tried that other than Kemp and Raffensperger.
Yeah, and not only did they not try it, those Republicans who did stand up, many of them, not all of them, were doing it when they were lame ducks. They were on their way out, and they did it in ones and twos. And so they could be isolated, they could be cut off, they could be cast out of the Republican Party. But when Kemp and Raffensperger did it, they did it together. They were united. And then they kept standing up to Trump. They kept showing integrity in this moment. And they have been politically rewarded for it in a tough state for Republicans over the last few years. And it's been a tough state for Republicans because of Donald Trump. And look, there are other state officials who have stood up to Trump and remained popular as well. I mean, Governor Ducey of Arizona stood up to Trump and he remained popular, though, of course, not with the core base of the Arizona Republican Party, which has gone nuts, censured him. But there are Republicans who have stood up to Trump, who have remained popular. And I do think it is very interesting that we've seen this pattern where Chris Christie is now right up there with Ron DeSantis. Now, I say up there, that they're still not very high in the polls, but he's there with Ron DeSantis in New Hampshire, standing up and taking on Trump directly. Because if you're not taking on Trump, if you're not presenting the case for the alternative to Trump aggressively, why would Republican primary voters want to vote for you, especially since the people are voting in Republican primaries right now are overwhelmingly part of that MAGA base? What is it that's going to take them away from Trump other than taking him on? Just being quiet and passive in the face of all of these indictments is not a sign of presidential strength in any way, shape, or form.